This is the morning brief from the Economic Times.
Have you ever booked an LPG gas cylinder at home? If you have, then it would be easier for you to understand and comprehend the concept of battery swapping. Seriously, I'm not kidding. What do you do when you learn the cylinder is about to get over? Step 1. You call the service provider. In this case, a gas agency affiliated to, say, an Indian Oil or any other state-owned refiner like Bharat Petroleum or Hindustan Petroleum. Step 2. You give them your customer number. They give you a booking reference number, right? Step 3. In a day or two, the gas delivery bhaiya comes, picks up the empty cylinder, gives you a new filled up one. That's swapping, isn't it? Do we own the cylinder? No. We lease it from the gas company. Similarly, think of a car or a 2 or 3-wheeler battery as that gas cylinder. I didn't know honestly till yesterday that in India now rules allow you and me to buy an electric vehicle without the built-in battery. But you can take it on lease. Once the battery is fully drained, you can simply go to the outlet of the energy operator and swap the discharged battery with a fully charged one for a fee, instead of having to wait yourself for an hour or more. Now, households don't own the cylinder, but pay for consuming it, right? Likewise, vehicle owners too do not have to own the battery, but take it on lease or rental and drive into the sunset. It's on the go, lighter on the wallet, so far so good. Till this Tuesday, when our finance minister Nirmala Sitharaman turbocharged the concept when in her budget speech she said,
"Considering the constraint of space in urban areas, for setting up charging stations at scale, a battery swapping policy will be brought out and interoperability standards will be formulated."
Is this policy push a manna from heaven that is expected to re-energize the battery manufacturers and hasten EV adoption? What is the use case? Are batteries the solution to our vehicular pollution, and do companies have deep pockets to invest and build pan-India networks? In this episode, we will try to figure out all these points as well as understand the growth possibilities from a startup that is actually building the blocks of battery swapping in the country and a technocrat who is at the center of all the policy making action. It's Friday, 4th of February. From the Economic Times, I'm your host Arijit Barman, and you're listening to Battery Baatein on the Morning Brief. Our first guest, all the way from Seattle, is Ajay Goel, co-founder of Sun Mobility, one of the pioneering companies that offers electric vehicle solutions and services, including battery swapping. One that counts global companies like Bosch and Vitol as its backers.
So Sun Mobility has been the pioneer for battery swapping in India since 2017, right? We have been building battery swapping solutions for both buses and two-wheelers and three-wheelers. And we are a technology-based company. We have our own proprietary batteries. We have our own swapping stations, which you may see in some of the Indian Oil stations near you. We have our own very modular plug-and-play system of integrating our batteries with vehicles. And finally, we have a software system that we call Smart Network, in which everything strings together. Our focus is primarily the commercial driver market. We want to provide battery swapping to drivers who drive for a living. These are the people who can get the best users of electric vehicles. which is why even the Indian government policies favor commercial vehicles rather than personal vehicles.
But why not target the passenger car segment as well?
I think because batteries are still expensive, and the people who will get the most economic benefit, right, out of batteries are the people who drive the most, who consume the most fuel. See, at the end of the day, right, this is about greening the state and reducing pollution. So it makes sense to go after people who consume the most fuel, which is the delivery drivers. So for those kind of people, it makes the most sense to reduce their fuel consumption or eliminate their fuel consumption and instead move them to consuming energy. Fuel, right, oil, petroleum is still almost 1/3 of the contributor to carbon emissions in the country. And we need to find a way to mitigate that. That's where I think this comes in. Fuel, right, is what we are trying to replace. We spend around $200 billion on fuel. That's the opportunity space for people like us, right, who provide battery swapping services, to reduce that consumption and replace that with battery services, right? Essentially, you're providing a charged battery as a service instead of getting fuel that you burn and it goes into the atmosphere.
What are the benefits for drivers?
There is room for improvement there to go electric. Essentially, you're changing a fossil fuel-based engine with what you call an electric powertrain. Now comes the choice of, do I use a conventional fixed battery, which is all the rage in the West, or do we do something very uniquely innovative in India, which is battery swapping? So they're trade-offs. So when you use a fixed battery, you typically want a bigger and bigger battery so that you don't have what we call range anxiety, where people are concerned that during the day, I run out of juice, and then I have to drag my 3-wheeler or 2-wheeler to the nearest charging station, of which there aren't that many, and then charge it. Almost half your energy consumption is going into carry the battery around, because people want bigger batteries so they can drive the 200 or 250 kilometers a day. And then obviously the upfront cost goes up, right? In India, we don't like to spend too much cost upfront. We want the most cost-effective solution, which these large batteries are not. And then government then has to subsidize it, which is where the FAME program comes in. So kind of running into sort of essentially a pretty big expensive solution. And we know that even though new batteries are warranted for 3 years, when you typically buy them with a vehicle, they don't always last that long. Whereas if you do battery swapping, we ensure that the batteries are properly checked, they're safe, and they're maintained so that you always get a fully performing battery. On a fixed battery system, particularly in India, is that it takes a long time to charge these batteries. And typically you don't have infrastructure to charge at home. So if I'm running a fleet of, let's say, 20 auto rickshaws, I need to find a garage or a warehouse where I would park all these. I have to charge them at night. Because if the driver takes it home, where is he going to charge it? We don't live in a Western market where everybody has a 2-car garage and they have easy way to install a charging station there.
You talked about cost. To what extent does cost, actually reduce?
Typically, in an electric vehicle, 40 to 50% of the cost is the cost of the battery. So when we sell an auto rickshaw without the battery, it costs less than what a regular auto rickshaw with a petrol or a CNG engine would cost. And then the battery swapping services, right, that we offer typically cost less per kilometer than the cost of the petrol or the CNG would cost. Now, when you start working with fixed batteries, that math goes on its head, right? A typical fixed battery vehicle will have much bigger battery and will cost roughly twice as much than a conventional ICE vehicle. That means you have to get financing and pay a higher monthly EMI. But your fuel cost is much lower because electricity is cheaper. So again, for Western markets, those kind of things work well, where capital is freely available and not that expensive. But in India, where cost of capital is high and people are funds constrained, much better to have people like us bear that cost and provide you batteries as a service.
You must have guessed by now that the battery is at the heart of all EVs. But before you get supercharged, let's get one thing straight. Startups from around the world have experimented with swapping but have bombed spectacularly. Several are still in stealth mode after decades of R&D, and even companies with $1 trillion of market capitalization like Tesla, the last word when it comes to electric cars, have taken a backseat in battery swapping after experimenting in 2013, despite founder Elon Musk's initial enthusiasm from back then.
The concept is not new. Better Place launched an EV and battery swapping company in Israel, but the company went bankrupt in 2013 even though it had almost $1 billion in funding. And Tesla gave it a try in 2013.
It took 90 seconds for a pack swap. So hopefully this is what convinces people finally that electric cars are the future.
But a new breed of companies like Ample, Neo have now taken the challenge headlong with new, lighter, leaner battery packs and other service solutions. Some like Gogoro from Taiwan have shown global scale is also possible, growing rapidly across Asia with plans for an India entry as well, with a joint venture with Hero MotoCorp. Gogoro CEO Horace Look has now become a poster boy.
Electric motorbike is a hot topic all around Asia, mainly because of all these rapidly growing cities where thousands of people are living on top of each other with nowhere to charge, nowhere to park, where the traditional plug-in charging solution just doesn't work. This is where battery swapping and electric motorbike are going to actually change those landscapes for the future.
So when you start with something new like EVs, it's always the early adopters who are looking at a premium vehicle who are going to go buy an electric vehicle, right? The Tesla, made its name by attracting BMW and Mercedes buys, right? They are not going after people who are buying low-end Teslas or Chryslers, just like in India. The electric cars are still expensive. So you're talking about a premium segment. And then the governments, right, which wanted to encourage that, started giving subsidies to bigger and bigger batteries. So they created an incentive, whether it's in China and the US, in which people wanted to give bigger and bigger batteries. And that was fine for consumers because they get less range anxiety. And it is fine for suppliers, right, because they get to sell more. Now, that's all fine for what is commonly called the early adopter market. But over the last 3 years or so, battery is, electric vehicles have started to become mainstream. And battery swapping has now suddenly become the buzzword. There was one battery swapping company, I would say 10 years ago, that failed spectacularly because they were too early in the market. But now, as electric vehicles are becoming mainstream, and you're starting to deal with customers who want the most cost-effective solution, that's when you have to look at battery swapping. And suddenly there's a resurgence of about 10 or so companies who are taking this seriously, is implementing. So Gogoro, I'm sure you've heard of in Taiwan, has, almost 3,000 or 2,000 swapping points in just one city. And they're trying to go implement their solution worldwide. There is a Chinese company called Neo, which has both a fixed battery and a swappable solution, but they are working, 64 cities with 700 odd swapping points and working with Shell. China's largest battery manufacturer, actually world's largest manufacturer, has now announced a swapping solution for cars, which they're going to launch sometime later this year. So now everybody's sort of jumping into the solution. So what I'm starting to see is innovation in China, innovation in the US, but India is in a very, very unique position where we have enough demand, right, and enough technology leadership to make this work. So it's in terms of cars, right? They are still catching up to even the convention, to the Teslas of the world, right? So I haven't heard of that many companies, conventional car companies, getting into swapping. But when you look at people like Honda has created a swappable battery several years ago, and they are trying to implement it worldwide, including India.
EV adoption, even in India, has certainly been on the rise. On one hand, we have legacy players like Mahindra, who've teamed up with fossil fuel-focused energy giants like Reliance and BP, who themselves are transforming as key stakeholders in the entire green energy value chain.
The first focus is on three-wheelers because that's a market that's really taking off today. And we're looking at making it easier for three-wheeler owners to find innovative solutions either around battery swapping, around using mobility as a service. And therefore, that will be the first focus of this MOU. And then beyond that, we will look at four-wheelers and other areas as well.
On the other side of the spectrum, we have local startups like Ola, Ather, Simple Energy, Bounce, Hero Electric, Torque Motors, Ultraviolet, making their presence felt by rolling out electric bikes and scooters and forcing incumbents like Bajaj or TVS to also rev up and take note.
This is the Dot, a personal home charger for your Ather 450. Maybe you live on the 7th floor, or the 1st floor, or the 17th floor, or an independent villa. The Dot fits everywhere.
In 2021, led by high-speed scooters, EV two-wheelers recorded an over 5-fold jump in sales. Imagine all the delivery boys and gig economy workers. This clearly is no longer in the realm of possibility. In 2022 as well, sales are expected to grow up to 6 times. Fiscal incentives like FAME 2 has helped in faster adoption, as have the rising prices of motor fuel and even imported CNGs that are used for transportation. In fact, many would say 2021 was that inflection point, and the budget announcement could not have come at a better time.
From a policy standpoint, I think 2021 has been an incredible year, and battery swapping was sort of a kind of a missing piece in the overall scheme of things. If we look at India, it's a unique market, right? We all know, the kind of vehicles we have, 80% of that chunk is within two-wheelers and three-wheelers. And within this segment of 80%, another 80% is majorly for B2B fleets and fleet operators, right? So the kind of market we have is unique. It's light form factor vehicles majorly being operated in a fleet from an electrification perspective. And when we look at the policy standpoint, we have the $6 billion PLI schemes for, right? If you take examples of countries like, let's say, Taiwan. So these countries have very clearly shown that battery swapping is the future and it can take care of the electrification needs of countries. And from a city standpoint, the biggest challenge it serves is the real estate problem. Electrification, as we know, is a regional play. Electrification doesn't happen nationwide. It starts with mega cities, metro cities. If you look at the top 10, 15 cities, which is where electrification will happen, you have the problems of real estate. Real estate is expensive and swapping can be done in less than 80% of land area of charging. So this is the biggest advantage. For example, let's go back to the Taiwan example. Gogoro's swapping station in this case, they have an area of 4 by 4 square feet, right? 4 square feet area for a single swap. On that one station, they can swap 150 vehicles in a day. So basically, we have 6x of throughput in a swapping station. From a city standpoint, more importantly, the national grid. India right now is generating about 393 gigawatt hours of energy as of December 2021. Going by the mission of Government of India, if we have to go to 30% electrification by 2030, we'll need additional 115 gigawatts of energy to electrify the entire fleet of vehicles, which basically means that the kind of load on the grid which we'll have, especially in certain hours of the day, because most of these people, when they go to their offices, when they go for their work, they'll be charging their vehicles in the night time, after 8 p.m., after 9 p.m. That will put a significant load on the grid overall. Vis-a-vis, if you have swapping, the load is distributed in the entire day.
That's Dev Ashish Aneja, auto and electric vehicle sector lead in Invest India, which is part of the Commerce Ministry. As the space evolves and India commits to a cleaner, greener future, Devashish feels we will have different solutions for different modes of transportation.
We are basically technology agnostic, infra agnostic, and all of these will coexist. The industries and private sector will have to identify let the markets decide which thing works better for whom. But the past data and the history and globally we have seen charging works very well for four-wheelers, works very well for buses, works very well for high-performance vehicles, which are majorly for the B2C segment end users. Vis-a-vis, if we go towards lighter form factors, two-wheelers, three-wheelers, swapping can easily coexist with charging and has significant benefits to the state.
But many still worry that raw materials that go into making the battery in the first place are unavailable in India. So, if we are now importing billions of dollars of crude for our cars, for our EVs, we will still continue to import another set of raw materials and run up a huge bill. Where then is our energy security if we remain vulnerable to price and supply shocks from external sources?
In batteries, we have multiple chemistries. We have 6 key raw materials: lithium, cobalt, nickel, manganese, aluminium. These are the major ones, 5-6 raw materials. So from an India perspective, we are high in manganese, we are rich in aluminium, we are rich in carbon, which is graphite. For lithium, nickel, cobalt, of course, we do not have those as of now, but lithium, we still have some reserves in Mandya. Having said this, lithium by value in a battery is not more than 5 to 7%. Lithium, it's a myth that we call it a lithium ion battery, but if you look at the value of the cell overall, it's not more than 5 to 7 in terms of value. Not talking about nickel and cobalt, the world is moving towards low nickel, low cobalt batteries, or no nickel, no cobalt. Low nickel, low cobalt, or no nickel, no cobalt. And India is no different. India is also moving towards chemistries, which basically will be towards nickel-free, cobalt-free, and we are working with several technology companies. And similarly, if you look at the sodium ion chemistry, again another new age chemistry which is being developed especially for the storage application, stationary application. So to a certain extent, we are taking care of imports globally. Secondly, battery vehicles are not like the ICE vehicles. In ICE vehicles, we import crude, and once we drive, that import goes out in forms of combustion. It is completely gone. However, once these batteries are reached their end of life, they can be recycled. And 95% of these raw materials can be recovered, which basically means even if we import some of these raw materials in the beginning few years, we can eventually recycle them.
But how are we going to build battery manufacturing at scale to compete with China, the dominant battery supplier, or a Korea? That's where the government's Make Batteries in India through the PLI scheme comes into play. It aims to make India the 4th largest production hub in the world. PLI schemes are a unique tripartite agreement between the center, state, and a private company spanning over 8 years that offers several incentives for local value addition to manufacture at scale and be globally competitive.
The response has been incredible, Arijit. I mean, it was a 50 gigawatt hour of tender and we already have bids for 130 gigawatt hours, so 260% of oversubscription. We have seen good interest from some technology companies, Indian companies doing joint ventures, some global funds who have invested in who have shown interest into invest in some of these battery consortiums. Also, good amount of interest from some supply chain partners who are keenly looking at the market and who will enter at the right time. And similarly, the recycling companies who have been watching the market very, very closely.
To roll out such networks, battery swapping companies need deep pockets. Investments in assets like batteries are also high compared to the fraction that is charged from the customers. How will the economics work then? I asked Sun Mobility's Goel.
This is very much a market, Arijit, that requires not just deep pockets, but a set of broad capabilities, right? Because you're trying to build the next generation of a refueling ecosystem that has come about in the last 100 years. So it'll take time. It's not for the faint of heart. And what's really encouraging is to see a lot of mainstream energy companies, automotive companies are taking this seriously and are committing to invest.
India, much like any other large country, have an exhaustive petrol pump network nationwide. Are we therefore looking at battery companies piggyback on them to gain footprint?
Very much so, right? For example, we already have a partnership with Indian Oil. And we have deployed with 30 of their stations, and we are deploying rapidly in many more of that, right? And, stay tuned on that topic. But then other nationalized oil companies, like Bharat Petroleum and all, have also conducted pilots for swapping, as they have for charging as well. People are going to start charging their cars and two-wheelers at home. Then they lose that business. So they're very keen to see how their retail footprint can actually play a significant role in this new ecosystem.
What kind of scale then is required, Mr. Goel, to make swapping available to all compared to, say, a fixed charging system?
It's all about coverage, right? So if you do swapping, you need coverage. People will want that when they are close to running out of juice, running out of electricity in their battery, there should be a station available for them to go swap that within 2 or 3 kilometers. No different than what it is today, right? If you get into an Uber or a cab, half the time, if there runs out of fuel, he expects another petrol pump to be around 2-3 kilometers, maximum 5.
But standardization of batteries so that a consumer can switch them easily at different charging stations will be a key challenge, even if the finance minister talked about it in the budget. Battery management systems are proprietary IPs. These are closely guarded secrets. Plus, quality and technology vary.
That's a bit of a head scratcher. I think it's a bit of a holy grail saying, look, what if batteries are interoperable across different providers? But I think people need to realize that's a little bit harder because batteries are very different. They have different, each supplier's cells and battery packs are different. So I know there is a thought process towards interoperability, but I think the industry has to work closely with the government to see how it's implemented. I think there can be interoperability in terms of connections. There can be interoperability in terms of data communication. But if you expect that, today I'm getting a battery from Sun Mobility, and tomorrow in the same vehicle, I'm getting a battery from, Gogoro or a GOBP, I think that vision will take a little bit more work.
The positive takeaway is by announcing a policy mechanism in the budget, the government has publicly stated its commitment, as did the Prime Minister at the recent COP26 meeting. In the past, we have seen EV policies or deadlines get torn between turf wars between ministers and their mandarins. But the future is now, and these are the building blocks that give us hope. There will clearly be no one size that fits all. Technology is also evolving to ensure that these battery swapping stations are powered by clean energy sources rather than the grid that in India is still thermal power dependent. Till then, the government can perhaps fix the inverted duty structure on batteries, charging infrastructure, and on retrofitting kits by bringing down the GST from 18% to perhaps 5%, making it uniform with EVs. If all that is not electrifying, I don't know what is. You've been listening to Battery Baatein on the Morning Brief with me, your host Arijit Barman. Thank you, Mr. Goel and Ashish. Deeply appreciate you taking time out. This episode was produced by Diya Rekhi from ET and Varun Kapahi from Awaz. Soundarya Jayachandran was a sound engineer from Awaz. The executive producer, yours truly. I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode. Do send in your feedback to themorningbrief@timesgroup.com and share the episode on your social media networks. The Morning Brief drops every Tuesday, Thursdays, and Fridays. Goodbye and good luck. All clips used in this episode belong to their respective owners. Credits are mentioned in the description.